private jet has crashed in Russia just north of Moscow, and among those listed as passengers on board were Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner Group. 10 people were on board the aircraft, including 3 crew. All 10 are reported to have been killed. This was said to be an Embraer aircraft on a flight from Moscow to St. Petersburg, and St. Petersburg, of course, is where the Wagner Group has its headquarters. This has been a scenario that has been much feared and much anticipated, given the failed attempt by Prigozhin and his forces to march on Moscow back in June. Since then, Prigozhin has been a marked man, and there have been concerns about his safety that have never quite died down. Clearly, Prigozhin was a significant challenge to Putin and to Putin's authority before a deal was reached that stopped this march in its tracks. Whatever that deal, the details were never quite disclosed, and its stability and future have always been much doubted. There have been reports suggesting earlier that under the deal Prigozhin went to Belarus. That never was quite verified. In any case, he did return to Russia, if indeed he did go to Belarus for a long stretch as reported earlier. But the fact is that his whereabouts have been a bit uncertain. No one has quite known where he has been, what he has been up to. There have been sporadic and patchy revelations and statements here and there, but nothing that has been very clear or confirmed. This now would indicate that there has been a good deal of upheaval within Russia around him. It was reported by Russian television that Putin is unforgiving of those who rise against him. In spite of that, we were told that there has been an agreement reached and Prigozhin and his forces forgiven. No one was quite convinced that that is the case. Now there are renewed questions about what has happened, and renewed questions further what Wagner and Wagner's leadership would do under the circumstances, whether they would continue to rise in revolt under some other leadership or be absorbed in the Russian military as planned earlier, or simply dispersed and silenced. But this is again an uncertain time in Russia.
Russian authorities say mercenary chief Yevgeny Prigozhin was listed as a passenger in a fatal plane crash about 2 months after the mutiny he led that brought the country into a crisis. This unverified video from a Russian news outlet is said to show the moment of the crash. Reuters used satellite and street view images to confirm the clip's location, but could not immediately confirm that Prigozhin was physically on board the aircraft. According to Russian authorities, the crash happened Wednesday evening north of Moscow, leaving no survivors. 10 people were on board the plane heading from Moscow to St. Petersburg, 3 of them crew members. State media is reporting that 8 bodies were initially found at the crash site, with search and rescue operations underway. Data from online tracker FlightRadar24.com shows a plane heading northwest and then shortly after 6 p.m., suddenly disappearing. Prigozhin soared in prominence after Russia's invasion of Ukraine last year. The 62-year-old's fighters led the assault on the city of Bakhmut in the longest and bloodiest battle of the war. In June, he spearheaded a mutiny against Russia's top army brass. President Vladimir Putin said that move could have tipped the country into civil war. He was supposed to move to neighboring Belarus under an apparent deal to end the mutiny. U.S. President Joe Biden said he wasn't surprised to hear the news.
There's not much that happens in Russia that Putin's not behind, but I don't know enough to know the answer.
There was no immediate comment from Russia's defense ministry or the Kremlin.
Yes, would Putin have done this? Well, he has certainly the Russian security forces have a history of poisoning people at home and abroad, and political opponents or people that Mr. Putin has previously called traitors. And he has, of course, called Prigozhin, well, he's called some of them traitors. But, you know, why did it take so long? Your original question. Yeah, this is interesting. In a way, it took a long time. In a way, it was quick. I think the answer to that is why didn't it happen in July? Is that and you know, the General Surovikin's dismissal or disappearance and dismissal yesterday Well, I think there is some division in the military on how the war has gone. And so likely Prigozhin had some sympathizers in the Russian military, as does Surovikin. And so making sure that those people have been demoted or removed, and this has happened actually with some members of the Russian military a little lower down over the last month or so. So I think that's probably why it has, and also making sure they know where the bulk of Wagner forces are. Wagner was asked after that rebellion to turn in its equipment. So presumably that's now been done. The bulk of the forces have arrived in Belarus. So I think it took a little bit of time to get all of those ducks in a row. And so in that sense, this timing, is probably the earliest such a thing could have happened without causing further trouble or rebellions within the Russian military. Also, he's largely been divested, Prigozhin, of some of his bigger businesses prior to this. So, if we look retrospectively, this timing sort of is almost the earliest it could have been done in terms of getting all of those ducks in a row. So this is a society that has radically been, has really been put under strict controls in the last 2 years. So to see some elite infighting and this attempted mutiny with Prigozhin was remarkable. Now to see, this dramatic action taken sort of indicates they thought he was a threat, right? And they don't want that threat any longer. And so I think it's also a broader message to elites that don't challenge me. I think a dictator tends to say that when they're feeling insecure, and so as I said, I think it indicates instability in Russia. Russia's not a country we necessarily want to see unstable and broken apart. Because of the nuclear weapons and who gets those. So the fact that there is some division in the military, and I think this was pretty plainly seen in June, is worrisome for the stability of the country. Now, on the upside, if it meant the end of Putin and suddenly the start of a liberal democratic regime, well, okay, great. But I don't think that's what's going to happen next in Russia.
Mr. President, do you have a reaction to the plane crash in Russia?
I don't know for a fact what happened, but I'm not surprised.
Do you believe?
There's not much that happens in Russia with Putin not behind, but I don't know enough to know the answer. I've been working out for the last hour and a half.
Will you watch the debates later?
I'm going to try to get as much as I can, yes.
What's your expectation for the
I have not. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everybody. All right, you guys got it.